what will Houston do with the number 2 pick? That and more this week on the couch. Dane Brugler, the Athletic. Dane, what is Houston going to do with number 2?
Starting off with a tough question, right?
Yeah.
That's a good question because that's the domino that we're not quite sure yet. The closer we get, the more confident we feel that Bryce Young's going to be the pick at number 1 to Carolina. Number 2, so what I've been told is the offensive coaching staff in Houston they're not universal with their belief that there's a quarterback worth taking at 2. And, as much as we believe the Texans have to take a quarterback, just because it's the timeline and, they haven't really addressed the position with a first or second round pick since Deshaun Watson. And, this is a first year coaching staff and D'Amico Ryans and his guys. And they don't think they feel pressured that they need to rush the process. So if they don't truly 100% believe in one of these guys, they're not going to take them. But Nick Caserio is still making the picks, so it's a really interesting dynamic that I honestly believe they're still working through. They're still having conversations in that building, trying to come to a joint conclusion among everybody, all the decision makers that have a part in this. And so I think everything's on the table at this point, including. Is it CJ Stroud? Is it Will Levis? Is it Anthony Richardson? Is it a trade back? Is it Tyree Wilson? Is it Will Anderson? I mean, I really think that there are a lot of options on the table, and they are considering all of those. Here we are a week before the draft, and they're still making all those considerations.
Do you think they're on an island with their evaluation of Stroud, or do you think there are teams that would be eager to move up to number 2?
Not an island, but I do think it goes to the point that all these quarterbacks are viewed differently. No matter what any of us say on Twitter or any of our personal rankings, how we view these quarterbacks, it might seem obvious to us or anybody that looks at these guys. But that's not how NFL teams operate. And it goes back to every single year you could look back and look at past years, and the quarterback rankings from team to team are very, very different. And this year, especially with guys that are talented but flawed, you could poke holes in all these quarterbacks. None of these guys have a perfect approval rating, when you watch them. So I do think that there will be teams eager to potentially move up or be, maybe a little fist pump if CJ Stroud does fall past 2. Including the Cardinals at 3, because then the trade opportunities start to become a little more clear. It could be as easy as the Colts moving up 1 spot to secure their guy if they believe Stroud is that guy. Or it could be the Titans. Titans have made a lot of calls to teams in the top 6 picks, just kind of fishing, saying, okay, what would it cost? Let's just kind of set the parameters now. If we wanted to move up, it's this. Okay, well, what if we offered that? They've made those calls. So, the Titans are squarely in this mix. You can't take the Raiders. They're in this, in some shape or fashion. And something I don't want to get too far down into this, but next year's quarterback class factors into this as well. Go back to last year, the day before the draft, I'm working on my final mock, and I'm talking to, my buddies in the league, and I'm asking them, hey, where are these quarterbacks going to go? And all of them said kind of the same thing. It's just, we're not sure, but they're going to go. They're going to go. They always go. They didn't. We had 1 quarterback in the first 73 picks, and talking to those same guys after the draft, it was like, wow, you know what? Teams were willing to be patient. They were forward scouting, looking forward to this class and saying, you know what? Next year's class looks a lot better. Let's just wait. And that's how some teams will look at this draft class. They will say, you know what, we do like Anthony Richardson, but next year's class, let's keep building the roster. We feel good about our job security for another year. Let's continue building the roster. Let's wait for next year to get our guy. Meanwhile, other teams will be a little more pressed to get their quarterback this year, and it could be the Bucs looking to trade up. It could be, I mentioned the Titans are in that mix. We have to remember too, the Texans have pick 12. If they wanted to move around and be a little creative, they could do that. So we're a week out, and it's still very much up in the air where these quarterbacks are going to go, what order, and what kind of trade action are we going to see. in order for these quarterbacks to come off the board.
It was striking last year how patient teams seem to be. And like you said, part of that is an evaluation of next year's class. Some of that is the margin for error. Unfortunately, Dane, I hate it. I bristle when people say, well, you are going to lose your job if you're wrong. These guys are going to lose their job if they're wrong. Well, that actually skews the evaluation negatively, I think, towards safer decisions, towards job preservation decisions. But you're right to look at, say, the Texans. They can be patient. I think the Falcons are a team that clearly understands build the team, and when the moment comes to get your quarterback, get your quarterback.
Right.
The Titans, the Raiders, they might feel a little more urgency. They might force that. And then you look at the Lions and the Seahawks are really interesting teams because they have 2 first-round picks just like the Texans. So that maybe gives you a little more margin of error. Hey, we shank one of the first-round picks. We were swinging for the fences. We still got a really good player with the other one. So you're right that it adds a lot of variables. And there's a lot to sort through here. The first thing I'm going to ask you to go back through that answer is, why do you think teams see the quarterback so differently? Is it their system? Is it what they weigh in evaluation? Is it a philosophy of what matters at the position? Why does it vary so wildly?
There are so many variables involved in scouting the quarterback position, right? I mean, you and I could look at the same quarterback and come to a very different conclusion based off of what we're willing to bet on. Because that's when you draft a quarterback, you're making a bet. You're making a bet that based off of certain criteria, certain things that you focus on at the position, and we've seen there's not an exact formula that is the right way. We've seen plenty of just when I think a team they feel like they figured it out in terms of the quarterback formula. Someone comes along that just debunks that,
Right.
So
Patrick Mahomes.
Right. I mean, it's a very much intangible position, and that's where a lot of teams, that's why we're hearing a lot about the S2 testing. The quote unquote new Wonderlic. It's a way to gauge a player, especially quarterbacks, their ability to process. It's different than just how book smart they are, or what kind of GPA they had in college or high school. It's more about quick twitch processing and the ability to it's just a cognitive test. So and there's some teams subscribe to it, some teams aren't interested, and so it's not a universal test, but the teams that do really care a lot about it, if a quarterback does not grade highly, that's something that will affect how they grade that quarterback. So again, not every team uses that test, and so it's something that and the ones that do, some weight it more than others. So again, back to the original point, it's just there's so many variables here with these quarterbacks. You look at Bryce Young. Some teams are willing to sacrifice the size for everything else that Bryce Young offers. Others want nothing to do with it. They're not going to draft an outlier in the top 5, top 3 picks. So, it's with all these quarterbacks, you have to sacrifice something. And right. With the guy like Anthony Richardson, you're sacrificing, the ability to come in right away and make a positive impact for you. It's going to take time for Anthony Richardson. And it's tough because even though it's going to take time, he's 20 years old. He's had 13 career starts, didn't come from a big time program in high school. There's just a lot he doesn't know at this point. Now, 3 years from now, he might end up looking like a steal if he's the 3rd or 4th quarterback drafted this year. But it's going to take a little while to get there. And you have to be comfortable taking your lumps along the way, because this is a player that needs to play. He needs to get out there in order to get better. That's how he's going to learn from his mistakes. And does he have, and it goes to Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts, as many ups and downs as he has had since he entered the league, his mental toughness. I mean, we saw it going back to college, obviously, getting benched in the national title game, and the grace and the toughness, the mental fortitude he had to, not let the weight of the world come crashing down on him. That has, shown here in the NFL, where even when he made all these mistakes, he came out better on the other side because he learned from them. And he didn't allow those to bring him down. Can Anthony Richardson be that same type of guy? Because he's going to make mistakes, and that's okay as long as you learn from them and you're better for it. So I don't think anybody expects Anthony Richardson to come in from day one and be a guy that's going to help you compete for the division. But 3 years from now, that is hopefully the plan. Hopefully he can, get to that point. So, it's a quarterback group that is flawed but talented. I think all these guys project as starters. Talking about the top 4 guys: Levis, Richardson, Bryce Young, and CJ Stroud. And then some people would even throw Hendon Hooker in the mix, which I think is a little rich for my taste personally. I think when you talk about timeline, a guy that's 25 years old, coming off the ACL injury, coming from an offense that we just have not seen quarterbacks from the college level from that offense go to the NFL and find sustained success. So, it'd be I'd feel okay taking him in, say, the second round as a developmental starter, but to take him in the first round, you better be pretty convinced with your evaluation on Hendon Hooker, and not every, team is quite there with him. So it's fascinating to debate these quarterbacks and then, revisit it a year from now, 2 years from now, and just to see how differently we look at it.
Yeah, you brought up Jalen Hurts. Let's go back and talk a little bit about Jalen Hurts in the context of the draft process, as he just got a well-earned big contract. You mentioned the ability to learn, the ability to grow, mental toughness. That's part of the picture. Maybe that's the answer to this question. What did the NFL miss in the evaluation of Jalen Hurts? Why did he fall to the late second? What was the NFL wrong about?
I don't know that they were necessarily wrong. I think the evaluation, he went even higher than I thought he would, to be honest with you. And, the Eagles almost didn't draft him. If the dominoes fell a certain way, they were ready to take somebody else. And if the Eagles don't take him there, he probably falls to the third round, and who knows, where he gets snatched up. I just think that his ability that mental toughness is to work through his mistakes and get better. That's something that is hard to do, hard to gauge, and he was able to do it. He's able to thread that needle where most quarterbacks, they would have, it'd have been too much. Just the weight of the world on them making these mistakes. Your own, your home fan base saying, thinking about quarterbacks in next year's draft. I mean, even I think about at this time last year, we were talking about the Eagles potentially drafting a quarterback, having 2 first-round picks, and having the ammo to go up and get a CJ Stroud or a Bryce Young. I mean, that's what the conversations were at this time last year. So it's not like I don't want to say that teams necessarily missed on him. I want to give more credit to Jalen and his ability to improve. And sometimes that happens. It doesn't happen often. Usually quarterbacks, if they don't, because I think I go back to that. The college football playoff game against LSU. Go back to that game, and he's not throwing with anticipation. He's not working 1 to 2 to 3. He's not getting through his reads. His accuracy was okay, but it wasn't necessarily a strength to his game. So I mean, you could go back to college, and there are these question marks about his game, and then he goes to the pro game, and I'm not to take anything away from him, but he went to a great situation.
Right.
You think about the talent he had around him this year. You think about the coaching staff, the play calling. He went to a really, really good situation, and good for him because it worked out. And a lot of credit goes to him for the way he progressed and improved and just kept getting better regardless of the outside noise.
Yeah, I think that if there's anything to take away from what you said, it's that the evaluation can be right, but the player can transcend it.
That's it. Well, and I go back to last year, Isaiah Pacheco. Right. I'm going back to my the draft guide last year and reading his report. I'm like, yeah, okay, and I'm typewriter feet, runs angry, not the most patient. I mean, I'm like reading my report. I'm like, I got him exactly right, and I gave him a 7th round grade. That's exactly what Chiefs drafted him. So I was like, okay, got the report right, got the projection rate right. He just played his butt off, and he outplayed where he was drafted. And no, I think you're absolutely right. Sometimes that just happens.
Yeah, the player's still the master of their destiny. And then you mentioned the surroundings, and especially for quarterbacks, because what are we getting at here? Confidence. We talk about this a lot on the show, Dane. Confidence is such a big part of the arc of a player's career. And the organization you land in, the quality of the organization, the quality of surroundings. That's why Colts fans should be excited with Shane Steichen and the quarterback they're going to get, because he was a big part of this story about Jalen Hurts. Okay, getting back and just putting it point blank, the way you put it, what would you bet on at the quarterback position?
I would bet on Bryce Young. I would be perfectly fine making that bet, even though he is a complete outlier size wise. He's going to be the smallest quarterback in the NFL the moment he's drafted. I know he was 204 at the combine, but he's going to play probably around 190, around there. And you just have to be okay with that. And I'm willing to bet on everything else that he has to offer, the processing, the vision, the creativeness that he brings to the position, the natural instincts, the toughness, the competitiveness. I mean, it just normally with an Alabama quarterback, you think about all the talent. You know, the offensive line's elite. The receivers are big time. This year, that wasn't the case. I mean, when you watch Alabama's tape, it felt like Bryce Young was putting the team on his shoulders and just dragging the team up and down the field. Now he did have Jahmyr Gibbs, who was outstanding. But Jahmyr Gibbs led the team in receiving. I mean, that's not a good sign when your running back has to lead your team in receptions. I mean, it's a credit to Gibbs because he is that good. In my opinion, he's a first-round pick. But that doesn't mean that, I think it does speak to the lack of wide receiver talent that Alabama had this year. And it speaks to Bryce Young that, and he won the Heisman the year before, yet and then so the numbers weren't as good this year. Yet I was more impressed with his 2022 tape than I was his 2021 tape because he did it without Jamison Williams, without John Mechie, without some of those guys. So I Bryce Young, the size it's okay to be concerned about the size. I think I'd be surprised if you weren't. I mean, the durability. It's more durability than anything else because this is a player that welcomes chaos. He wants to hold the ball until the final second. He loves to move the pocket, throw off platform. He is a master at creating space for himself. But in the NFL, when everyone's a little bit faster, hits a little bit harder, he needs to learn how to take care of his body. So he's not taking those big hits and, making sure he's preserving his body. So, it's not a guarantee that he's going to be able to withstand, a 17 game schedule. And then if there's playoffs involved, a lot of people bring up a former Alabama quarterback and Tua Tagovailoa and the injury issues that he's had. So Bryce has been healthier during his college career than Tua was. So I think there's, he has done a better job of taking care of his body, just meaning not taking as many hits and showing that he can be a little more durable. But for the long run, it's certainly a fair concern to have with Bryce. But again, I'm going to bet on that and bet on everything else he has to offer.
Yeah, I think the Panthers did well to give up what they did. I don't think they overpaid, and especially to do it that early in the process, because it sounded like if they had waited, other teams maybe didn't get in on the talks because they needed more time to have clarity. So good on the Panthers, and we'll see what happens there. I love the way you said, hey, even though Bryce Young wasn't as good and didn't win the Heisman in 2022, you were more impressed because of the difficulty he faced.
Yeah.
And certainly one of the things I like to really emphasize is when you're watching a player's college tape, their college games, not every play is created equal in terms of probative value to project them as a pro. That's why production-based models, some of this stuff, things where you treat every play equally or you treat all production equally. Sometimes it isn't even a play where there's any production that shows you something that you care about, especially at the quarterback position. So you learn more. I think you learn more about a quarterback in their most difficult game, in their worst game, than you do necessarily in their best game, which brings us around to Will Levis. And there's a fine line here, right, Dane? There's a fine line between, because we talk about surroundings, there's a fine line between making excuses and saying, hey, you didn't see the real player because of their surroundings, right? If there's bad habits, if even mentally they seem, I remember watching Josh Allen at Wyoming and still believing in him because he didn't have the best surroundings, but he would try to overcome that all himself. And when Josh Allen makes bad plays, it's because he's trying to do everything himself. Even Patrick Mahomes, when he's had rough stretches, it's because he's trying to do everything himself. That's not necessarily a bad thing to see. There were some bad things to see. I think Levis is the one, even more than Richardson, that has the widest range of evaluations. Are you more on the, hey, these are potential valid excuses for some things in his play that might not lead you to believe he's going to be a good pro quarterback? Or do you think like, nah, look at what's there evaluate what's there, and you probably won't take him in the first round.
He is a good example of you have to try and do your best to separate reasons from excuses. And I think it's a shame we could not see Will Levis back-to-back years with Liam Cohen as the play caller. Losing him, you go back to the 2021 tape when he had a functional offensive line, had Wan'Dale Robinson as a go-to receiver, and he had Liam Cohen running the offense. The Kentucky offense in 2021 looked a lot different than 2022, where you had a new play caller. The receiving talent was a lot younger, not as consistent, and the offensive line was below average. Also factor in that Will Levis was hurt. He should not have been out there. People don't realize he's getting shots before every single game just to get out there and be on the field. So the toughness factor is off the charts with this guy. So again, if you don't like Will Levis, you're going to hear me talk right now and say, oh, he's just making excuses for him. Well, I mean, I'm not saying that, Will Levis should be the number one overall pick, but these are reasons why his play was not consistent this past year. There are areas where he needs to get better. And there are some things that failed him last year with things out of his control that, both those things can be true. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And with Will Levis, I still think that the ingredients are there for him to be a functional NFL starter. I think Carson Wentz is a fair comparison, and both the good and the bad, the positives and the negatives. There's a reason, 3 different franchises paid him a lot of money and gave up draft capital to make him their starting quarterback because they saw something in him that this guy gives us a chance. Will Levis, same type of thing. And, we'll see. The future hasn't been written yet in terms of, like with Carson Wentz, if, he'll actually end up being able to lead a franchise to the playoffs and beyond. But with Levis, I think when you factor in, he's smart as heck. The intelligence factor is awesome. The toughness is remarkable. He also has all the physical traits you want, from the size, one of the quickest releases, we've seen from a quarterback. The arm power is easy, and the velocity is above average. Does he need to see things a little bit faster? Yes. That will vastly help his decision-making, his accuracy. Sometimes he's not always trusting what he's seeing. And that's partly a product of the talent around him and just the offensive system. So, there's a lot of things that, again, it sounds like I'm making excuses for him, but I think there are more reasons why his tape was more uneven than you want to see. But at the end of the day, when he started at Kentucky the last 2 years, they went 17-7. I understand, a lot of people will say, win-loss is not a quarterback stat. I get it. But it still says something that he was able to help Kentucky to a 17-7 record in the SEC. That's not easy to do. So, I think that he's been beat up quite a bit when there's more context involved when you talk about Will Levis.
Context is a great word there, right? Because it may just come down to which organization he lands in, right?
Yeah. That's everything, right? Quarterback, running back, it doesn't matter the position, where you go and the coaching you get, the situation you're in. Sometimes that dictates I always go back to, I wish we could have an alternate universe to understand what would have happened if the Bears drafted Pat Mahomes and the Chiefs drafted Mitch Trubisky. Where Trubisky goes to a situation where he's got that offensive structure. Is he still starting for the Chiefs right now? Mahomes goes to a situation where he didn't have that offensive structure, didn't have a ton of talent around him. Was his talent that great where he would be able to supersede everything else bringing him down? What does that alternate universe look like? Go back to 99, Tim Couch going to one of the worst expansion franchises we've seen with the Browns, and how bad that the talent was on that roster. If McNabb goes 1 and then Tim Couch goes 2 to the Eagles, how does that those two futures of those two quarterbacks go? So it's fascinating when you talk about destination, landing spot, and the infrastructure of where these guys land. That is a huge piece to the overall puzzle when we look back and examine, why a guy worked or didn't work out.
Yeah, and Andy Reid there, the common piece. I like how you bring up alternate universes because I always like to say that during the draft, countless alternate universes go in and out of existence. There's all
Oh
kinds of
yeah.
things. Sometimes we find out after the fact. Sometimes we don't.
Hmm.
Like you said, there's scenarios where Philadelphia doesn't take Jalen Hurts.
Right.
And as the draft goes on, we may not realize it, but there's this massive range of outcomes for things that we all care about in the NFL. And over the course of just those 3 days, all kinds of possibilities are brought into existence and then extinguished. Um, uh, Now, one last thing I want to talk about before we turn the page on quarterbacks, because there's another possibility, and you talk about surroundings. Are there any better surroundings for a quarterback than San Francisco? But it sounds like Mr. Irrelevant, the most relevant Mr. Irrelevant ever, Ryan Suckup. Sorry,
Yeah.
uh, Brock Purdy. It
Yeah.
sounds like, at least this morning, there's reports from Ian Rappaport that the San Francisco's listening to calls, maybe not making calls, but listening to calls about Trey Lance. And Trey Lance is an interesting case because he hasn't really played that much meaningful football in what
Right.
now, like 3 years.
Right.
Now we talk about alternate universes. I always like to bring up that in the press conference on Friday, because Atlanta waited until Friday to sign AJ McCarron as their backup
Mm.
and in that draft, and they were sheepish when they were asked, Terry Fontenot and company, hey, you guys waiting to see what happened before you
Hmm.
took a backup quarterback off of the free agent list to see if you were going to what are you talking about? So Atlanta, we talked about that team being patient. um, there's an assumption there too that if Trey Lance hadn't gone number 3 to San Francisco, he would have gone soon after. Now, are we going back and saying, hey, if you can get Trey Lance now for maybe a future first round pick or even less than a future first round pick, that's a steal? Do we change our valuation because of how things have gone? Do we try to read into San Francisco's reluctance to play him? Would you give one of these teams that need a quarterback a green light to get in on these talks, or are you a little more hesitant about Lance than you were 2 years ago?
No, I mean, nothing has really changed where I would alter my, scouting report and the way I feel about him. Because like to your point, we just haven't seen enough of him, so far. And so I'm still optimistic about Trey Lance, just like I was pre-draft. He was my third quarterback that year. And, if I'm the 49ers, it would take a big offer for me to trade him. I mean, you think about with Brock Purdy coming off the injury, we don't even know if he's going to be ready to go week 1. So, am I really comfortable putting Sam Darnold out there as my starter
Mm.
for a week or two or whatever it ends up being? And then with Purdy, he always worries me with an elbow injury, and what happens if he misses more time? What happens if Purdy has somewhat of a sophomore slump? Like I just, if I'm the 49ers, I'm not motivated unless someone blows me away with an offer. I'm not motivated to move Trey Lance, especially talking about day 2 picks. Why would I move Trey Lance for a day 2 pick?
Mhm.
I don't understand. It's day 2 picks are great, but I would much rather have Trey Lance on my roster as an insurance piece. And I'm going to wait out a desperate team. And you think about it, you look at Houston. Houston's interesting because they, who's their coaching staff now? It's D'Amico Ryans, Bobby
Right.
Slowick. It's
Right.
guys that came from San Francisco. They know Trey Lance, very intimately, based on their time in practice and in meeting rooms, things like that. You look at Tennessee Titans. Who's their GM now? Marion Carthon. Where'd he come from? San Francisco.
Mhm.
Obviously, Trey Lance, I think, was a Kyle Shanahan pick. But we don't know exactly how Carthon felt about Trey Lance, but that's still a connection you could make. If I'm San Francisco, I'm a second round pick and a fourth round pick. That's not going to do it. That's not going to get it done. That's I'm not trading him. I'd rather have him on my roster as an insurance policy. I don't need to make a decision tomorrow on his 5th-year option, anything like that. We still have time. Is Trey Lance's value going to be that much lower, a year from now? I don't think so. So if we're talking about him as, being able to get him for a day 2 pick. So I would be surprised if they dealt him, unless a team made an aggressive offer, which included a first round pick. And when you're the Texans and you have multiple first round picks, if you're, the Titans and you want to be aggressive, if you don't, maybe you don't get one of these guys, Will Levis or whoever it ends up being, Anthony Richardson, whoever they have their eye on, maybe they could make a move. So, the Trey Lance thing is interesting. I would still just be very surprised if they ended up dealing him for, just a day two pick, or, just something that wasn't really reflective of a former top 5 overall pick who just has yet to see the field yet.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, we know now that the draft is, I like to say, the plate tectonics are in motion. Lots of things, some unexpected, some expected, but maybe with an unexpected team. There's going to be a lot, not just the players that get selected. Okay, turning the page. And one of the things that I love about paying as close attention to the draft as we do, well, nobody pays as close attention as you do, Dane, but you get it, is that you're also tracking how the game is changing. Because there are players that if you evaluated them 15 years ago, you would have a different evaluation because the game is changing. One of the things that keeps coming up is the value at the running back position. And boy, is it rough out there for running backs. I've always said running backs should have their own union. There should be different rookie contract structure for running backs because it's clear that teams look at them as disposable. Really, you just use up as much as you can on their rookie contract. No second contract has turned out well. Is there a second contract? Nick Chubb, maybe? I mean, no second contract. Even Nick Chubb, I think, at this point.
He wasn't a first round pick. So
right, exactly. Yeah. Well, and that's a key difference because with the first round pick, you can have the 5th-year option and then 2 franchise tags. And with the downward pressure on salaries, a franchise tag is nothing now, $10 million. That's why Saquon Barkley's not showing up, right? We're waiting to hear about what's going to happen with Joe Mixon. We're waiting to hear about what's going to happen with Dalvin Cook. And these are players that were signed to second contracts that before they get to the end of the contract, the teams are not that Austin Eckler, and so on. Even Derrick Henry, a franchise identity player. So we come to Bijan Robinson. And let's not say, because like you said, Gibbs is worth a first-round pick, but a first-round pick, most years, Dane, what are we talking about? 15, 20 true first-round graded players. So if you take a running back at 26 or something like that, notice I picked 26 out of the air. If you take a running back at the back half of the first round, but we're talking about Bijan Robinson as a potential first half of the first round pick. Do you think, based on what's happening at the running back position in the NFL, that that's a foolish move, or maybe it's a brilliant move because you're zigging when the league is zagging and you're getting a player? Can he provide enough value at the running back position to justify that high of a pick?
100% I do. And I think we've gotten too far with this running back slander that you can't draft a premier talent at the position in the top 15 picks. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Now, if I think your point is correct about, talk about the second contract and what that looks like and living up to it. And that's totally separate from this. I'm not talking about drafting him number 1 overall or drafting over a quarterback. And every team is different with their roster and where they are with their timeline of competing. But, you look at the Eagles at 10. The Eagles don't draft running backs in the first round. They haven't done it since the 80s. So I don't think it's going to happen at 10. Now, maybe if they traded back or with their second first round pick, maybe you could see that happening. But if I'm there at 10, I mean, why not? Just because we don't do it? Like, that's not a reason. I can understand if you can make the argument that, a defensive player, with Pro Bowl potential, like a Lucas Van Ness, I can understand why you'd want to go that direction. But don't tell me you're not going to draft Bijan Robinson just because we don't draft running backs in the top half of round 1. Like, that's not a reason. That's just, I think it's we're going too far with how we're looking at these running back situations. And Bijan is the type of guy that, I think you're right. 20 years ago, you think about that 2005 NFL draft where we had Ronnie Brown go 2 and Cedric Benson went 4 and Cadillac went 5. 3 running backs go early. 20 years ago, Bijan Robinson, he's right there in that mix. He goes 2. He might be the first running back drafted that year. But now in today's NFL, it's really tough to mock him in a mock and project him because the way teams look at running backs now. So, I just did a 7-round mock and I had him going, I believe to Washington with pick was a 16.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's one of those, is it running back the number one need on the team? No. But you think about what he can mean to your offense. You don't have an established quarterback. You probably have a new ownership coming in. You want excitement with the team. Bijan Robinson can give you that as a receiver, as a rusher. He offers something a lot of these other backs don't, and he's got star potential. So, and he's ready from day one. It's not like this is a guy you're going to just slowly work into the mix. And no, he could be your guy, your running back one, from training camp on. So I think that something that does hurt Bijan a little bit is this is a pretty stacked running back class. I think we're going to see a lot of these guys fly off the boards in the 3rd round. But even in the 4th round, if I can get Eric Gray from Oklahoma in the 4th round, I'm feeling great about what he adds to my running back rotation. Chase Brown from Illinois, same thing. Dwayne McBride will be somewhere in that mix from UAB. Teams really like him. So, it's a running back class where you can easily talk yourself out of a Bijan Robinson because of the way the running backs stack up not even the 2nd round. I would say 3rd, 4th, 5th round, those 3 rounds, that range is a very strong group of backs.
Yeah. Bijan Robinson falling to a playoff team. That might be a mistake by the rest of the league.
Where do you think he goes? If you had to guess right now, we're a week out. Does he go in the top half? Could you see a team like, maybe if Philly trades back from 10, Washington at 16 is a possibility. Some have thrown out Detroit at 18 as a possibility. Chargers at 21, just if the Eckler situation is continues to be, an issue, could Buffalo move up to go get him? If you had to guess, where do you see Bijan going at this point?
I love the possibility you brought up earlier, and also you brought it up in your mock from about a month and a half ago, that the Eagles try to trade down and take him. This is kind of a non-answer. I say a smart organization, a team, like you said, that's willing to look past these value, which is, I think Buffalo is a team that has to have urgency right now. Their window's closing. I know it sounds crazy to say their window's closing, but they're not getting closer to the Super Bowl. They're getting farther from the Super Bowl, and they need something in their offense that's an identity more than Josh Allen, go out and do what you do. So that's a team that would have the motivation, especially if he starts to fall out of the top 15, 16 picks, to make that move. So I like Buffalo. I'll pick one that I hope that's what happens. I hope for Buffalo fans, and like you said, he can be an instant producer. Okay, turning the page to the wide receiver class. Now, again, league context surroundings. Wow, there was a bit of a hysteria about wide receivers the last few years because of the contract growth. You saw a lot of wide receivers last year. It was a mad rush to get those top 5 wide receivers. It might not be a stretch to say that, the top wide receiver in this class might not even be in the top 4.
Might not have been a top 6.
Top 6, right?
We had 6 receivers drafted top 25 last year. So, if Jackson Smith-Njigba, for example, if he were in last year's draft, he might have been the 7th receiver drafted. I think that's a fair point.
So you're basically you answered the question we're going to ask it is, do you agree that this is kind of a shabby wide receiver class, even though we might see some guys get? Is there somebody? Well, let me ask you this: is there somebody that maybe could at least push aside this idea that this wide receiver class isn't up to snuff compared to previous ones, and be that player that outperforms? Who are you willing to put your chip on among these wide receivers to stand out from this class when we look back 3 or 4 years from now?
That's the thing. It's not that it's a bad wide receiver class. It's just it's not comparable to what we've seen the last 2 years. So relative to Jamar Chase and Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle 2 years ago, and then last year with those 6 guys in the top 25. Relative to those 2 classes, this is not a receiver class you're getting super excited about. Similar to what we said earlier, a lot depends on where these guys end up, and understanding what they do well. Because we have all these names in the same bucket under wide receiver, but they play. There need to be sub buckets of different positions that they play. Jackson Smith-Njigba and Quentin Johnston are both receivers, and people are going to debate till they're red in the face about who should be, where they should be in the rankings. Yet they're two wildly different receivers and what they offer and what type of role they play on an offense. So, it's just we have to add context to anytime you're discussing wide receivers. You have to add context about what role they have, what they're going to do. And for a team that drafts them, they have to have a strong understanding of that. If you draft Jalen Hyatt in the top 40 picks, you have to have an understanding of, okay, this is a guy that is not going to give me a ton underneath. He's not, that short area quickness, a lot. You want him getting linear. You want him using that speed, the downfield tracking, the ball skills. That's what he does best. And maybe over time he can become maybe a little bit more of a well-rounded receiver. But if you're drafting Jalen Hyatt, you need to understand what he gives you. Jackson Smith-Njigba, I would not label him as a slot only, but I would label him as a quote unquote best in the slot. I think he could take reps outside and be just fine. But the strength of his game is the spatial awareness, his understanding of how to attack space, set up defensive backs. The route running is outstanding. It's on an NFL level already. The ball skills are terrific. So you want him in the slot and being able to create those mismatches, even against a nickel, using all that space to his advantage. So if he goes to the right, I had him going to Seattle in my mock draft. Obviously you already have DK and Tyler Lockett, and you have a promising quarterback in Geno Smith. I feel really good about what Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to give me in year one and throughout his rookie contract. Whereas maybe if a team or if a player goes to a different team, I'm not as optimistic. So so much depends on landing spot. But if I'm gonna have to bet on one of these guys, it's probably Smith-Njigba, because I have a better sense of what I'm getting based off of what he does really well. And at the core of scouting the receiver position, we can get in the weeds all we want. It comes down to, can you get open? Can you catch the football? Jackson Smith-Njigba does that at a high level. And so if I have to bet on one of these guys, it's going to be him.
Is this the best tight end class you've evaluated?
I mean, it's up there. It's got to be. It's one of the better ones, both in top-heavy first-round quality players and just overall depth. Michael Mayer from Notre Dame is just a really quality all-around player. Dalton Kincaid, you could argue, is the best pass catcher in this draft, wide receivers included. But he's coming off the injury. We don't have any testing data on him. So, each one of these guys, you could understand why there's some trepidation about taking him in the top 20 picks. Because you look at the track record of first-round tight ends, it's not great. Meanwhile, take the last 15 years, list all the tight ends taken in the first round in this column, and then all the tight ends drafted in the top 75 in another column. The ones taken in the top 75 or between picks 33 and 75, that column looks a lot better than the first round column. And so a lot of teams, those type of trends, they're going to pay attention to that. They're going to wait until round 2 to draft some of these guys. And I understand that. Especially because I do, Tucker Kraft is one of my favorite players in this draft. Sam Laporte is a really good player. Luke Schoonmaker is a very underrated. He's an easy day 2 pick all day long. So, and even after that, even into day 3 with, guys like Davis Allen and Zach Kuntz, Payne Durham, Braden Willis later on from Oklahoma. I mean, this is a really loaded tight end class between picks 20 all the way through the draft.
Talking about how the game is changing or changing back, do you think that the overall shift towards more running is going to encourage teams to take tight ends earlier? Are we going to start seeing more 2 tight end sets, in part because of this class, but in part because defenses have gotten lighter? Defenses are trying to take away the big play.
Right.
How do those two subjects fit together when you're trying to project this draft?
Yeah, it's all ripple effect, right? The way that defenses change, how they affect or how they defend offenses. Offenses are going to adjust to that, and yeah, I think that's certainly a possible outcome that we could see with more tight ends. Teams are always looking for those combo guys you can trust as an inline player, but also can give you that pass catching production, and that's why Michael Mayer is still my top tight end. That's why Darnell Washington, as he's such a unique player. We've never really seen a guy that big move like him and also have the blocking prowess that he has. And so, where does he fall in the top 50 picks? It's going to be really interesting to see how many go first round, how many once we get to the second round, how quickly these guys come off the board. Because there's a lot of teams that can use more tight ends. Not if they already have one, they are not afraid to get a second one, because that's, to your point, it's almost viewed as a starter and what they could bring to the offense. So yeah, this is a tight end class coming to the NFL at the right time, I think.
Okay, we turn the page, and we spent almost all of our time on offense because we are Football Guys, a fantasy football site at essence, but we love football. But I got to tell people again about the Beast. Another Beast is in the books. It's worth subscribing to The Athletic just to get the Beast.
Yes.
And what really stands out to me about your draft guide, other than just the experience and perspective you bring from all the years you've been doing this, and I think it's clear that you're trusted. And when some people like to report things about the draft, well, they might be being used. I think you're trusted. But also it's the bio section. Your bio section on players and for some players is almost as long as the strengths and the weaknesses and the bottom line, the summary about the player. And like we talked about before we went live for the show, I think that stands for, to understand the player, you have to understand the person. And I use your draft guide for research, and I'm hanging out with my wife and I'm telling her different things. This Rodriguez's dad she's from El Paso. He was a basketball player at UTEP. How awesome is that? Give me something that stands out as you were compiling these bios, something that stuck with you about a player, something that surprised you, something that really helped you understand the player in a way that you wouldn't have if you hadn't learned that.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because the learning about the journeys, that's my favorite part of putting together the Beast, because it's to understand where they're going, you have to understand where they came from, and no two journeys are the same. It's there's something different about each one of these guys, whether it's when they started playing football or the sports they played, their family dynamic, where they grew up, and just everything along the way has helped shape them to get to this point, and helps kind of give us a clearer picture of who they are as people. And so when you read my report, background on a guy like Jalen Hyatt, and you see that his dad was a professional cyclist, his mom was an All-American track athlete in high school, it's like, okay, not really a mystery where this guy got his wheels from. And you mentioned Christian Gonzalez. Yeah, his dad, 6'9", semi-pro basketball player in Colombia. His two sisters are very accomplished track athletes. And then, one of his sisters married to David Blau, former or current NFL quarterback, former Purdue quarterback. And so he's been playing catch with David Blau since, he was 10 years old, and, an NFL level quarterback. And that's been part of his upbringing, and that's something that helped shape him as a player. And Tyler Scott, one of my favorite players in this draft, wide receiver from Cincinnati, learning more about how in high school they ran more of a option offense, so he was basically a running back, and learning that he had 10 catches his entire career in high school. Meanwhile, you watch his tape and you would have never guessed that he has very natural ball skills with the way he attacks the football. So it's interesting seeing how quickly he's adapted to wide receiver when he was not running routes in high school. He was not. This is not a lifelong wide receiver. This is a guy that really transitioned to the position once he got to Cincinnati 3 years ago. So to see his maturation has been awesome. Tucker Kraft from South Dakota State, another one of my favorite players in this draft, learning that he had some six-figure offers, NIL deals. Alabama went after him hard last offseason. and some other schools did as well. And he passed them up because he wanted to stay with his guys, his brothers, his teammates. And South Dakota State ended up, I believe they won the FCS title this year. So it's a lot of these decisions, a lot of the background, helps form our opinion of these guys. Understand where they've been, adversities they've had to overcome. Whether it's a parent dying or some type of tragedy that they've had to endure along the way. It brings a human element to these players, and it's just a interesting part of the whole evaluation process.
Yeah, well, it makes it kind of cinematic,
Mhm.
and I always like to point out during the draft, we're talking about who had a bad draft. This move was terrible. Why did they take this player? But for these players, it's a culmination of their life
Right.
and for their families and for their communities. And there's so many people. I liked the one you put in about Devin Witherspoon, that he liked
Right.
basketball, and his mom, when he was a junior in high school, his mom's like, "Hey, why don't you try football again?" But because
Right.
of that, he was a 0-star recruit. I had to explain to my wife this morning what a 0-star recruit meant.
Right.
And you see that hunger and that belief in self,
Yeah.
and
And that's
having go ahead.
I say, sorry, a lot of these guys that you thought the door might have been closed. Yaya Diaby from Louisville, a defensive end who is going to be a day 2 pick. After high school, he was working at the airport. I mean,
Right.
he was not thinking about football at all. And then he got a call. One of his high school teammates got a tryout at a local JUCO, and he decided he was going to try as well. And the rest is history. Or Kobe Turner from Wake Forest, who he didn't go to these recruiting camps in high school because he's a big music guy. I mean, his nickname is the conductor. Choir, or the chorus. Plays multiple instruments. Music is a big deal for him, and still to this day it is. But that's why he wasn't highly recruited. And Richmond was recruiting his cousin, and they see his Kobe in the kitchen and said, "Who's this guy?" And it gave him a walk-on opportunity. He turned that into a scholarship. Then he transferred to Wake Forest this past year to get more notice. And next thing you know, he's being talked about as being somewhere as a mid-round pick. So learning about how some of these doors were maybe previously closed, and they whether maybe got just a little bit of luck where they got an opportunity, or they just knocked down the door themselves and created an opportunity for themselves. Always cool to learn about those things.
Yeah, I'll add one more, and then we'll go off the rails a little bit at the end here. I'd
Yep.
like the background about Joey Porter and his sister,
Right.
and the services for special needs children. His sister, you included that his sister is nonverbal autistic,
Right.
and he got a degree in rehab and human services so that he can join that business after
Right.
football. So you learn a little bit about maybe the plans after football. Speaking of non-football topics, I'm just going to serve this up to you like this, and I understand if you have to ruminate on this for a few seconds. What
Okay.
is doing all this draft scouting and understanding player development and understanding so much about this process? Because you're a parent of 4. How has it helped you become a better parent?
Wow. Interesting. Yeah, and I've got a 7-year-old, a 6-year-old, and then 2 twins that are 20 months old now. Or not, a set of twins. Yeah, two little babies. So it's never a dull moment over here.
Yeah.
But I think that uh, when you evaluate, time management is so big. Just from my process, like I have to watch thousands and thousands of players within a 12-month span, and understanding when to move on, because there's always another tape you could watch. Always understanding when you've seen enough, and okay, I can move on now. Just time management is such a big part of what I've learned to do. Like what for me personally, I wake up at 6:30, get the kids ready, get them to daycare, get them on the bus, and then I'm working nonstop until 3:30 when I get them off the bus, and then between 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock, strictly family time, doing nothing else except for family. And then between 7 and whenever I go to bed, whether it's midnight or 2 or whatever it is, I'm back at work. And so making sure I'm creating that time management for my kids, my family, but also the time management that I'm doing my job correctly. I'm doing it at a high level, so I'm still providing, and not only doing what I've done, but trying to get better every year and, taking it to another level. So just the whole time management aspect is something that I know is always, the balance. Everyone, doesn't matter what profession you're in, what type of career, is always something that you're constantly battling. But I know for me, scouting and understanding, okay, you know what, I've seen enough of this player, time to move on. Like just being confident in my time management, I think that's helped me, as a parent as well.
You use the word battling. When you were talking about that, Dane, I was thinking about one of those parenting aphorisms: pick your battles. Like there are certain things that are worth time to invest in, and there are certain things that you just, even though it might bother you or frustrate you, you just need to move on because there's not going to be a lot of worth there. So another thing we talked about before the show is, we've both been kicking around this draft world. I started doing this. I think the first Senior Bowl I went to was in 2007. The first Shrine game was in 2006. We've been doing this for a while. Yeah. So if you could go back, and Dane, how old were you when you started doing draft analysis?
I was in high school. My first draft guide that I ever did, it was my freshman year dorm room at Mount Union. That was 2005. I remember sitting, doing that, working on that, and wasn't anything near this, but yeah, it's crazy. It's been almost 20 years now, which is nuts.
Yeah. So if you could go back and talk to yourself in 2005, what would you tell yourself? What would you say, or would you even say anything? Would you just step aside and say, okay, you got everything in you, you got the compass in you, it's going to be fine? Like what have you learned or experienced that you think you would go back, maybe it would surprise you, or otherwise along the journey, along the way, what would you go back and tell yourself?
I think I would have told myself to be more okay with making mistakes. You have to be in this business, you're going to be wrong, and you have to be okay with that, because you have to learn from that. You can't just, okay, I was wrong on a player, I'm going to block it out of my memory, I'm not going to dwell on it. You have to, because you have to understand what you got wrong so you don't repeat the mistake. And, you learn from it, you evolve from that. And, when I first started doing this, when you make a mistake, it's, you beat yourself up. You're like, why did I think that? Or, but in order to grow, the best evaluators are self-evaluators, and understanding, okay, this is what I got wrong and why I got it wrong. And sometimes it's as simple as, the game of football is always evolving, and you have to evolve with it. And so even to this day, I'm dwell on my mistakes to make sure and to ensure that I am growing from that and getting better. And so, I compare it to a baseball, a hitter in baseball. You get on base 4 times out of 10, right? You're doing your job. You could strike out 6 times out of 10. Doesn't really matter. As long as you're getting on base 4 times out of 10, you're doing your job. And so, it's not quite as the same in terms of hitting on players with evaluation, but you're going to miss on players. And as long as you feel good about your batting average at the end of the day, I think you can feel proud about, what you've done. So, it's that's definitely be a big part of it. But, and my journey's has been what it has been. There have been times I've interviewed with an NFL team, didn't get it, and I was heartbroken. There have been times where I've interviewed with a team and had a job offer, and then it just didn't feel right, or my family dynamic wasn't right, and so I couldn't take the job. And I always wanted to be with the team, never in the media side of things. But I tell you, the way things have worked out, I'm not sorry about it. I feel like it's, the way things have worked out, I'm very blessed, and to be able to do this every day and, call it my career. And, I'm very, very blessed the way the last 20 years have played out for me.
Yeah, maybe we all feel that way. And hey, don't beat yourself up, because so much of it is out of view. Even for someone like you that's very well connected, so much of what causes players to hit or not hit is out of view. Some of it is unpredictable. Some of it, like what Houston's going to do with the number 2 pick, bringing it full circle, it's just not known. It's not possible to know. And I think what good draft analysts like you do is tell a story so you get the player. And you can even say, hey, in these scenarios, this player is going to flourish. In these scenarios, this player might struggle. What we don't know is where they're going to end up, and whether they're going to be in surroundings that are conducive to their growth. What's going to be conducive to your growth as a football fan, as someone who understands the draft, the beast, the athletic, Dane Brugler, This is a wonderful time. The culmination of all this is almost here. We love doing this. We feel blessed to get to do this for you because you all are so very classy.